What is going on, dreamers? Okay, so the last video we did on Destiny went pretty well. Reception wise, people left some comments. We got into a little bit of conversation, and that's what I like to hear. So today it's going to be a bit more of a controversial topic. We're moving away from just Sneeko and Alba and YouTube drama. Today we are talking about a far right student on trans issues and diversity, and Destiny is sort of standing on the far left side, debating the opposite. I think this is a topic that definitely needs more attention, definitely needs to be discussed, and I definitely want to raise some conversation in the comment section about this topic. It's something that people tend not to talk about, I should say, because of how triggering it is to some people. But without further ado, let's hop in. Let's see what both sides has to say. This is Destiny against a far-right student on trans issues and diversity. We're just going to watch the first student. If you want to watch the rest of the video, it's about an hour long. We're just going to watch like the first 15 or so minutes. So feel free to tune into Destiny's channel to watch the rest. Let's get it.
How's it going?
I'm Carson Wolf. I've watched your stuff a while. You know, I'm a Brandon fan. I'm pro Biden whenever he was doing like the 1994 crime bill and whatnot, and when he was more base. But now he's being super cringe. You know, he's essentially just like a walking zombie. And you got all these like lefties and these like trannies, and you know, a lot of these people just kind of occupying the power vacuum that's going on right there. And now, you know, crime's increasing. They're trying to, you know, they're classifying like countries like Sweden and the United Kingdom as like human rights abusers if they don't follow the foreign policy of transing the kids.
Sure.
I think that's a bad idea. So
I don't. Okay.
So I mean, before Destiny even speaks, I don't want to just like listen to Destiny and then like just parrot his stuff. So before Destiny even speaks, I do want to say when people say things, and this is coming from a criminal justice student, people say things like crime's increasing, or this new wave of ideologies is making the world a less safe place. Let's just establish crime, even in today's standards, is at a low point. Crime is not at a higher point than it was in the 90s, which is why all of these initiatives had to be started on Get Tough on Crime in the late 90s leading up to the early 2000s. The reason for that was because during those times there was a large dumping of cocaine into urban, lower socioeconomic societies in which drug addiction and as a result crime, violence, criminality in general increased exponentially. Then, as a counterbalance, the government then had to implement policies which toughened up on drug users, toughened up on people who was involved in gang violence, and as a result, we have led to today where prisons are stuffed with people who are not only in there on lower level charges. So, as contrary to popular belief, there aren't freaking 200 million people in jail, all locked up for shooting somebody to death or for selling coke. Most of it is low-level offenses. But yeah, I just wanted to make that distinction.
Let's chill on transphobia.
Okay.
Secondly, let's focus on Biden. I don't know what Biden has to do with like figuring out trans policy in Sweden or the.
Him and Blinken worked to send out a memo to the United Nations.
A memo is a memo.
Yeah,
but
and it's like classifying countries that encourage transgenderism for children. Classification as human rights abusers.
Yeah, but
and because like, well, what has that done with Russia? You know, Russia's been completely cut off by half of the world right now because they're human rights abusers.
Another sovereign country.
Yeah, but that is the fact. They're saying like human rights abusers and whatnot.
Well, I mean, you can argue that there's human rights abuses that are happening in Ukraine.
Okay, but so do you agree with the foreign policy of doing
Okay. So yeah, that is another interesting point, which I will say Mr. Carson has a decent point, is that while, yes, Destiny, it is just a memo, it is essentially the United States and its policymakers establishing that if you don't agree with a certain way of thinking as a nation, then you are an abuser of human rights. You are bad. You are the bad guy. And I don't like this painting of other nations as bad versus good, because I think what will happen is you'll create a larger division than you will try to encourage unification.
of condemning Russia for their actions in Ukraine.
No. The one we were talking about earlier.
That being said, Russia is fucked
the United
up for
States posting
invading an
memos on
entire
how they
nation.
view human rights should be treated around other countries in the world.
Yeah.
It would depend on the enforcement mechanisms and the consequences of said memos.
Okay.
Like, I think the United States has every right to recommend like directives in other countries and then
Okay.
condemn them if they don't follow them. But it's going to depend on what the specific penalties are or the enforcement mechanisms of those policies to know if I'd support it or not.
Okay. Well, I think that it's pretty bad foreign policy, all things considered. I mean, Joe Biden.
Bad in what regard? And you
It's
disagree with it, or
wrong.
bad?
I think,
Okay,
cutting
so then-
off the private parts of children in nations and spreading our empire to do that is just a bad idea.
Okay, I don't.
And
think
it's
we're-
morally wrong.
Okay, are trans issues really that huge of a part of American foreign policy?
It seems to be with the.
I don't
with
think
the
it is.
people.
I don't really think. I think that in
Okay,
the
yeah.
general
See, now I want to highlight that point is because he says it seems to be. What seems to be is not always is my counter to that. And basically what that means is just because something is the buzzing point or because there are a lot of buzzwords and people jump onto these trendy topics and these triggering topics, it doesn't mean those are the central focal points of our foreign policy. A large component of American foreign policy is simply just getting oil. That is one of the main focal points. Not whether or not people should be practicing transgender rights or they should be advocating for it or stuff. Those are components of American foreign policy, but I believe they're much smaller components of foreign policy, and it actually makes people overlook the larger portions of American foreign policy when people are saying things like trans rights is one of the biggest things America's pushing for. No, we're just trying to get some oil. More than likely, we're just trying to get some oil.
Conversation of the world today. I don't think that trans issues are the things that we're focusing the
Well,
most on.
it seems to be that a lot of people on his side care about it. So.
And
you said it yourself. Stop with the transphobia. Stop with the. That's going against YouTube's guidelines. I know that.
Well, no, it has nothing
and
to
the
do with
reason.
guidelines. I mean, like if we get specifically into trans issues, right? I think the important thing when you talk about like trans, you bring up like cutting penises off of children or whatever. Like, I think it's important that if you've got a child and you've got a doctor and you've got a parent and they want to pursue some medical thing for their kid, I think it's important for those three parties to be able to have that conversation without like a state or government intervening in that conversation.
And so what's the difference between like that and Joseph Mengele?
Yeah, I've heard of
Yeah,
that.
he was a SS doctor. He did a lot of these sex change operations. The only difference was that they didn't choose to do it. So what's the difference?
That's probably
now?
a pretty big part.
Exactly.
Choosing,
but
it's probably a pretty
you're
important part
saying
of
that there's like virtue in just choosing to do something.
I'm saying
but
there's probably virtue. I'm saying that as a parent, if my child has an issue and I want to address that issue with a physician, and the physician is making a recommendation, I don't want to feel like the state is going to get between the three of us making the decision that I would say is best for my child.
Have you ever considered that there's a money aspect of doing that? That
money
people are
aspect of
trying
doing literally everything.
Like
in
so,
our
literally
world.
destroying children just for money. That's like essentially what's going on.
you could argue
and
that,
people need to have the choice
yeah, but you
to
could
do
argue
that.
being anti-trans is destroying children just for money. Like, I mean, what do you mean? You could argue.
No,
this
I
both
wouldn't
ways.
say that.
Yeah, well, of course you wouldn't, because ideologically that's what
Yeah.
you're aligned at. But you could just as easily argue that, like, oh, okay, well, we're going to say he's not trans, but it's going to pump him full of like SSRIs for the rest of his life. There's money there to be said as well. Like, I mean, there could be money on every side of any issue. You need a more intellectual and prudent analysis than to just say, well, there's money there,
and
so it must
I
be
think
wrong.
mine is intellectually and prudent. I think it's important to just acknowledge that this is wrong. We shouldn't be doing that on our foreign policy, especially.
Well, hold on.
I
What do you
think
mean
it's
wrong and we should
yeah, I
do that?
think
It
it's
is wrong.
important.
It is. I mean, why aren't you
to-
transgender?
Because I don't feel like I'm transgender.
Yeah, so it's all about feelings and choice, is what you're saying.
Well, a lot of
and there's
things
no
are
there's
about,
no
well,
inherent
yeah, of course,
virtue.
This is called liberalism.
There-
I mean,
but
if you're
yeah.
like in an authoritarian autocratic regime that we can say we have no choices
Exactly.
or whatever. But
And
I think in general, I think in Western
I
society,
disagree with that framework. I think
That's
you can
fine, but I mean, like-
choose to do wrong things. Do you acknowledge that?
That
You
is
can always choose to do wrong
that is
things.
the
Yeah.
acknowledgement,
So there's no
yes.
inherent virtue in choice itself.
There's no inherent virtue in choice itself, but there is an inherent virtue in choosing virtuous things.
How did we get on this? We were talking about Joe Biden.
Well,
but-
now you're giving me a huge criticism of liberalism, and
Yeah.
you're the one that wanted to make
and
the Joe Biden conversation.
I'm
nice instead of
illiberal.
trans
I'm
issues.
illiberal. I'm going to
Yeah,
face
obviously
it.
I can tell.
Yeah.
I don't think the Grubbers are very liberal. But like,
Whoa. I don't like that label.
I hear him. I see him everywhere.
I'm
I hear it.
no.
It's all good. It's all good. No, but like seriously, if you have a person, I guess then your argument is you just don't believe trans people are real at all.
Well, yeah, pretty much.
So how do you account for people that have said they're trans for like so much of human history?
I've said they're trans. Like people who say that they're another gender.
Okay, but
they're
like so
not.
then we've tried conversion therapy for a long
Yeah.
time. Doesn't seem to work.
It seemed to work quite a bit.
Absolutely did not.
How come?
Because it didn't. Because
and you think
here's why conversion therapy didn't work, right? Because if conversion therapy worked, there would be no gays, there would be no transgenders. That is the definition of it working: is you're converting those with an ill mind, those who think differently, to a new mentality. And I think a huge point that he needs to highlight within his own self, and I don't know if Destiny is going to pick up on this, is when you do an analysis of what he just said, right? He tried to compare during the SS times, during the times leading up to World War II, even World War I, even the Germans had been doing a lot of experimentation in cohorts with scientists from America, all the top scientists from around the world, doing a lot of studies and tests and different experiments centered around the DNA, and specifically what DNA, what genetics were superior, which is what, as you might imagine, led to the idea that there was a superior race, fostered, led, and commanded by Sir Hitler, who then took these ideologies and made them to the utmost extreme, stating that those who did not identify as those genetical traits were to be exterminated from the face of the earth. So that just sort of shows exactly how extreme these thought processes can go. Now, if you loop that back to exactly what he's saying that therapy and gender therapy to get those who are gay, transgender to think back to normal works. It doesn't, because if it worked historically, there would be no people that thought, or very, 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 very few, which I know statistically not a lot of people are transgender, but there would be so little people that thought that way, because then we would implement gender therapy onto all of those who we deemed as mentally unfit, and it would work according to him. However, he's not acknowledging the extremes that these can be taken to. Well, if you think that the therapy works for those who are mentally ill, who think they're a different gender, who like the same gender or whatever, if you think that it works, what is stopping you from taking that to the next extreme and saying, well, if it doesn't work, then we just kill them because there's obviously something wrong, or we put them and lock them away because there's obviously something wrong and they don't want to seek help? What is leading to those next steps where it's, this thing is bad, lock it away, kill it, get rid of it? And that is the problem with that train of thought. It's not really it's trying to identify things that were evil in the past and saying, well, those things were evil then, but then you're not saying, oh, well, these things that we're thinking now can become the evil of tomorrow. And that's very, very important to do.
Shooting people up with hormones and then calling it, like, you know, affirming is better for people?
For the people that it works for, yeah, that does seem to be a successful alleviation of problems.
So you want to ignore the suicide rate of them, too?
Suicide rate of who?
Of trans people.
The suicide rate of trans people seems to increase or improve after successful treatment, assuming they're in a supportive community. So, I mean, what do you want to...
How do you even, like, measure that? Like, how do you measure if it's afterwards? Because, like, you're saying, you know, trans people, quote unquote, which I don't really believe exists, before, you know, they don't commit suicide. And then once they do, once they transition and, you know, cut off their nuts and whatnot, then they're prone to suicide. And so, like, that's exactly my argument. I'm saying that it doesn't improve people's lives.
But for the people that it does, it clearly does. And there is some research to suggest that people that get gender-affirming care do have higher qualities of life.
And I will say that the research a lot of the time is, you know, ideologically focused as well in the same way.
So the research that's not ideologically focused is the research that agrees with you, or?
Yes.
Okay, well,
pretty much.
When we all hated trans people, like 10 years ago,
well, nobody's arguing to hate
everybody
people.
Said that like conversion therapy and stuff worked. It still didn't, right?
Hey,
you can argue that the research saying that like gender-affirming care and stuff is biased. Okay, sure, there might be some researcher bias. That's possible, but there's no research supporting conversion therapy. There wasn't for gay people. There's not for trans people. That doesn't seem to work. So insofar as we care about people, if we do, I do, maybe you don't, but if we do care about people, then our goal should probably be to find like, well, what are the treatments or therapies or ways of assistance we can help people to live better lives.
Yeah.
And insofar as that goes, for a person that is legitimately trans, not just a person having a phase in college or a girl that dyed her hair, but for a person that's legitimately having a trans experience and has had for their entire life, it seems like some form of gender-affirming care is the only way to actually alleviate their dysphoria. Just telling them, no, you're not trans over and over again doesn't seem to be very successful.
I disagree. I think, you know, obviously.
Disagree with that.
Well, I mean, it's just, you know.
You can't just untrans somebody.
Yeah, like, you can.
Yeah, okay.
You can. I mean, there's been a huge detrans.
I see. This is where I'm getting a bit confused, Mr. Was it Carson Wentz? I'm getting a bit confused as to what exactly it is that you think goes into just detransing somebody. I don't want to sound too liberal because I don't necessarily sit that far on the fence either way, left or right. But when you say, well, yeah, there is, you're referencing studies, research, and data, which is good for all these other points, but for this point, there's no data that suggests that. There's no evidence that just telling a trans person they aren't trans works. There's no evidence that these forms of therapy that you're suggesting that try to keep people what they are works. There has been no evidence to suggest that, and that's actually a large reason as to why they have been becoming more and more pronounced and more loud and more forward in how they push policies that affect trans people. And that's because everything that we did in the 2000s, 2005, 2010, where you was just, calling people the F word if they liked boys, or calling people a tranny if they identified as transgender or whatever, that stuff doesn't work. And in fact, it was doing the opposite. It was pushing people to a point where they felt that their livelihood was in stake. And now this is why it's become such a large issue as it is today. This was not as large of an issue, or people weren't as outspoken about this issue as they were in the early 2000s because of this reason. Because there was no real way for you to tell someone that they were normal if you're calling them an F word, if you're calling them a tranny all the time, if you're telling them that they're not normal. That's just, there's no way to make someone feel accepted and say that that's working on top of that when all you did was put that person down. It has no positive effect, and there's no research to suggest that it did. So I'm confused exactly where he's getting this from.
Mission to, raise awareness for people going through transgenderism and whatnot. And also, specifically on the Biden memo, that was specifically focused for children to recognize
like a minor part of all of
I know, and you focused on it.
You're the one that literally brought it up. You said, I
brought it up as one example. You're focusing on it.
I'm not. That was the example you brought up. There's a war in Ukraine right now. There was Afghanistan to talk about. There's all sorts of other foreign policy issues. You've got inflation. You've got OPEC. You've got oil. And you're like, remember that memo that Biden sent out for trans kids to speak? I don't even know about this memo.
You should look it up. It's pretty interesting.
It sounds not very interesting, but
it is pretty. But yeah, you want to move to another subject?
Sure. Give me one more area that you feel like Biden's not doing
the border. I'm not a big fan of coming in and swarming our country and essentially just.
People are coming in and swarming our country.
Yeah, I mean, last year, in 1 year, about 2.4 million people crossed the border illegally.
Crossed the border and returned back.
That's just estimated. There's probably more.
Sure, cross the border and returned back, or illegally made it into the country.
Illegally entered the country.
2.4 million?
Yeah,
I don't think that's true.
I covered the story.
Did you really? Who was reporting on that?
I'm saying I wrote it.
Well, no, but I mean, who was what are the numbers coming from? The 2.4 million?
Oh, I think it was coming from the CDC.
That's a huge number of people to come in 1 year.
Well, that's what it was, so.
Were these coming in illegally, or were these people granted asylum or granted refugee? Or
coming in illegally.
Oh, well.
So there's probably a higher estimate of that, but so do you not acknowledge that there's a crisis at the border?
When I looked into the quote-unquote crisis at the border last time, it just seemed like business as usual. It doesn't have a high political goal right now, or there's not a high political attention to border
I will
stuff.
say, I mean, I don't have any numbers up in front of me, don't have any way to check this immediately, but 2.4 million people entering the nation illegally, that's a large, I mean, just to put that into perspective, I know it's percentage-wise, it's not a lot, but there are about 350 million people in America. So 2.4 million people coming in illegally, undocumented, that is kind of concerning. And I do see exactly why he would be apprehensive to that. As much as you want to say you lean left and that you're for immigration and that you think everyone, even outside the United States, deserve their rights and everything, you have to understand that these other countries exist too. And people are fleeing those, yes, but they're coming here for a reason. They're fleeing to this country because they're aware of how our social system is set up. They're aware of how generous our people are compared to their governments. They're aware of all of these things. And they will run to this country because they're knowledgeable of the fact that at least if they're on the borders here, they're not facing the mafia, or they're not facing the cartel, or whoever else is chasing after them back at home. And that's why most of these people run here is for opportunity, is for a better life. And honestly, it's good to be accepting. It's good to invite people in, and there has to be a cutoff point, and there has to be stringent rules around this, because you can mess up. You can let in the wrong type of people. You can let in too many people than our current economy is even capable of sustaining. So whether it's an issue of learning how to redistribute funds or whatever it may be, I do think that this is an issue that Carson has a bit of a point here if his number is accurate. But as Destiny was pointing out, that does sound like a massively large number, and it might be over exaggerated to some extent. But I could be very, very wrong.
Not because people are more focused on the economy, but
yeah, people are more focused on the economy. I'm not too big on the economy, frankly, but
you don't care much about it.
Well, I do, of course I do. I want families to be able to, I want a father to be able to afford living, raising a family on one single income. That's very important. Nowadays, things aren't looking so good for that. But
correct.
Yeah, I mean, the economy is important, and we're probably going to win on that. But so, you're a Joe Biden fan?
Absolutely.
Yeah, Joe Biden head.
Exactly.
Brandon
Joe
head.
Biden
okay.
stan.
But like, what's your reasoning? Because your sign says that. What's your reasoning behind it?
I think his legislative accomplishments so far have been pretty impressive. I think that the handling coming out of the coronavirus stuff, the amount of stimulus he was able to push for, especially the increase of the child tax credits, I thought were really good. Him trying to do what he can from the executive position of like doing the marijuana forgiveness and trying to get it rescheduled on the DA is good.
Yeah.
The student loan forgiveness, I'm not a huge fan of, but like politically, it's a pretty smart idea.
Yeah.
I feel like he's handled our foreign policy exceptionally well. I think the Ukraine was good. I think that even though it felt bad pulling out of Afghanistan and finally finishing that, I thought was a good thing. Yeah, in general, I think Biden has exceeded most expectations from the left for like getting like the recent huge legislation that had like the biggest spending in like green energy and stuff. I thought was good. The infrastructure bill was good. Yeah, I think he's done a really good job so far.
Okay, so most of your stuff is like very, the stuff that voters care about, and whatever. But I don't know. I don't think that's like quite enough.
I think whatever.
I'm more right wing ideologue. I think it's very important that we shift the culture. So I guess we just care about different things. I would be in support of all of those things if people gave us control over the culture and the society that we're molding to do that. But
what does control over the culture mean?
Most influence over pop culture, news, where people get their sources.
So pop culture? How do you get control over pop culture?
Correct. It
doesn't seem hard to do when you guys on the right are always saying that like. You'll say on one breath like liberal arts degrees and all that are for losers.
I'm liberal arts.
Oh, what do you do? What's your major?
I'm poli-sci in history.
Okay. Well, okay,
yeah,
so, like, a lot of people on the right would like make fun of you for that, right? You agree, right?
For sure.
Yeah. So I feel like the right wing has this problem where they've constantly demonized people going after liberal arts, and then several generations later, they're like,
well, I mean, liberal education
liberal
education is the ideal, in my opinion. I wish that people were going to school and learning about some of the great classics, the great writers. But
the white writers.
Well, I mean, some of them are white, some of them, some of them not so much, but a lot of them.
Yeah,
are like maybe, but,
exactly. I was gonna say name
like,
10 not white.
About those
it is not irrelevant. It is very relevant.
We're learning about BS diversity in architecture. That's literally a class.
BS diversity in architecture.
Yeah, well, no, not BS diversity.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
The class subject is diversity in architecture, and I'm not a big fan of it, frankly. Least favorite class.
What's wrong with the class?
That I will say is with these liberal arts degrees and with people being able to actually just go and study like whatever they may like, there has to be an acceptance that like within the workforce there are certain degrees and certain studies that just aren't going to be beneficial whatsoever. Like there's no possible way that you can leave with certain degrees expecting to land a job or one that pays adequately upon leaving college. So I will say that's a very good point on Carson's behalf, because there is probably too much now that you can hone in on educational wise, whereas we should have a larger focus on what are the let's say major 40, if we want to go that expansive, major 60 things that people should major in, should focus on in school, and let's focus all of our money and efforts in the educational aspect and the educational sphere on those things, rather than just increasing the amount of things you can study to fit the needs of what people want to study. I don't agree with that at all.
It's focused on expanding like diversity in architecture. Like architecture is beautiful because, frankly, Western architecture is beautiful because of something that I talk about too. And just like expanding, just people having like black people in architecture, Hispanics. I don't think that's productive at all. We need good architecture.
You don't think potentially
like look around here too?
You don't think there's potentially something lost not being able to look into other cultures to like gather information for how they did things?
Well, I mean, I'm a Catholic, so a lot of mine is focused around Catholic Western architecture.
Isn't there value that you can draw from looking at how other civilizations done things? So when I would,
I don't like a lot of other cultures.
I don't care if you like it or not. But your goal is to get educated. It's not like I want to take class about things I like. It's I want to expand my mind and broaden my horizons.
Correct.
Right. So if I studied music in school, right, and typically most of our music is organized around like Western.
You went to music school?
Yeah, believe it or not.
Oh,
yeah.
well.
It's organized around like Western concepts of like how music is organized, to put it simply.
Right.
But you can look into other cultures to get different ideas of like how could we do like a different system of notes, or like what kind of different rhythms could we draw from different cultures.
Yes.
And there are some things that if you spent your entire life studying, like classical romantic composers or studying only Western music, you would essentially miss out on this whole like other world of how you could arrange and orchestrate sound. And I feel like,
but that's also implying
the same for architecture as well.
That's also implying that there's superiority to be found in over there.
Absolutely.
No,
not. What a weird take.
No, I
mean, I didn't like that there's superiority. It's not about superiority. It's about diversity. You don't want every building built the same. Not every, you know what I mean? Like the arc. Yes, if you want to say the Western culture and the Greeks and the Romans, and Catholicism, the arcs on like doorways and building non-freaking all 90-degree angles. Those are all things that required some sort of cultural diversity. There had to be a way for people to travel, conquer, and learn from the nations that they had traveled to. There's no example of a Catholic pyramid that was done in cultures outside of Western culture. So, there are different structures, and I'm not like freaking an architecture major, so I can't really speak too far on it, but there are different aspects of, especially in this conversation, architecture that require diversity to be understood. I mean, there's not really a superiority in it. It's more of having a diversity of knowledge and knowing how to use those different areas of knowledge to conglomerate for a superior product. It's not about, well, this idea is better than this one, so we have to do this. These two put together might be better than both of them separately, is how I look at it. But, again, could be wrong.
Can appreciate the diversity of something without saying it has to be superior or inferior. Right?
No, like saying that we're missing something.
It's about expanding. Here. It's about like diversifying, I guess, like your understanding of the world. It doesn't have to be like necessarily. I would say it is superior to have a more diverse understanding, but understanding those other things doesn't make them superior.
I think that's also how you have a country lose its identity I think that's how you lose a country.
Identities are constantly changing over time. Conservatives
for sure.
Like, oh, we lost our identity. We're America. Like, what identity? Like, most of the identities that harken back to are European, which doesn't even make sense.
Yeah,
like
that's great.
It's not. We're not Europe. And if you go to Europe,
I mean, we're founded from Europe.
Right? Yes.
When they talk about
it's great.
That's only something an American.
Americans are known for hating Europe so much that we left. I don't know if you know the history of America, but Americans hate Europe so much that we left and started our own continent. We were like North America, all of this right here. This is ours. Not saying the continent didn't exist before, but we started America on the foundation that we would never go back to what the king had subjected us to over in the UK, right? People fled. They were the slaves brought over here, and they fought back and they rebelled as much as they could to make sure that America never, identity-wise, resorted back, which is why the Constitution is there, to what we were in Europe, which is the United Kingdom. One person rules over all, and we haven't lost that identity. Now we have 500 plus people representing us rather than one person making all the decisions. And we're seeing the ramifications of that, and people are making statements like, oh yeah, we've lost our identity. No, this is as America as it gets. Nowhere else on this planet does this shit happen. Why? Because we are America. We stand out and we are different. Just because we're so different that we've no longer even, we don't even look like those buck teeth motherfuckers in UK. That doesn't mean now all of a sudden our identity is gone. No, we're more American than we've ever been. We're more different in opinions. We're more diverse. We're more everything than other countries, and there's a reason for that, because historically America has always been built different, and that's my opinion.
They don't talk about a European identity, right?
Yeah, they talk about different, like, Italian culture. Yeah. They talk about French culture.
Yeah, but it's not going to be European ever.
Oh, no.
American would say
no,
European
I mean, even in America, we were founded from Scottish traditions. We're founded from English traditions, French.
Like, our contributions to the world have come in large part because of the diversity that we have here, right?
Correct.
Hip hop.
I don't think so.
Absolutely. Hip hop
What
and jazz
in the
and all
world?
these are, like,
I don't think those are our greatest accomplishments.
Those are huge accomplishments.
I think we've commercialized everything just off like we've created culture. No, but we've created culture off of what can be bought and sold to other people, and that's not a sustainable culture.
Okay. First of all, most of the classic, like, great art that you like is art that was literally commissioned by kings and queens, right? So the idea that, like, somehow because some stuff has become commercialized is bad totally sidesteps everything I was saying before, right? The fact that there's a commercialization of music doesn't like change the fact that jazz was probably America's, like, greatest contribution to the world of music, and that came arguably from an enslaved population, right? That came from, but not just them. It came from them taking what they understood from some European backgrounds in music too.
I love black people music.
I'm sure you do. I know.
I love black music.
Black people music.
Yeah, I'm a big fan.
Tell how you
no,
stand
it's
on
like
that.
unironically true. You know, black people have earned their place in America, I think.
Okay,
that's not what I'm arguing
Hispanic
against.
People and Asian people here have earned their place.
But I mean, these people are
yeah,
American.
I
sure,
agree.
yeah.
Black people are Americans.
Sure, and so are Asian Americans, and so are other American people that come
Hispanic
over.
Americans.
But creating like these, you know, national enclaves within America
you talk
just
about
makes
enclaves, but I mean, like, if you come to like any large city, you can see all of these people intermingling, walking around, interacting.
I mean, I don't think you see that anywhere outside of a church where people are all embracing a common culture.
If you go to any major city in America, I promise you see all sorts.
I mean, I disagree. I mean, you see it. You see Chinatown and Koreatown. These kind of like national enclaves within the country itself,
that you can literally
where like
walk
they maintain their own culture, and it's like
you say maintain it, but it's in a small part of the city. Like, these people travel to other parts of the city, and other people travel to those parts of the city. If you go to Chinatown in New York, you
it's
don't
not
only
just
see
Chinese
Asian
people, right?
You see
Exactly.
all sorts of different
You
people, right?
see
If you go to
different
places
people
in LA that have like different like cultural little enclaves, it's not just
that's where I'm
just
from,
Mexico.
actually.
It's not, sure, it's not GTA 5 where as soon as you go there, all the cars change and the people change, right? You see like a ton of people in all sorts of different parts of the city here.
All right, man. I think I'm gonna call it there. I think this has been a very fruitful discussion. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below, just on how they started off on the issues with trans rights and just how it sort of melded into this conversation more about diversity. I think it's very important that we realize that America could not have been where it's at today without diversity. I mean, America is literally the most diverse country on the planet. Inarguable. We have the widest diversity in terms of opinions, in terms of policy, and in terms of how different things are just from state to state. I mean, there are 50 states, and each state is completely different than the last in terms of social norms, in terms of policy, in terms of leadership. While there are, you know, similarities between whether or not it's a blue or red state or whatever, the swing state or whatever it may be, the people within each state knows their people. And even within those states, there are people within each neighborhood that knows their people. And even within those neighborhoods, there are people within each building that knows their people. You know what I mean? Everybody is diverse here. And people stand tall for what they believe in America, and that is one of the fundamental core values of being an American, is being able to stand tall on what you believe in without having some overarching superior cultural based on European tradition values being imposed upon you. But anyways, let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below. And dreamers,